In this unit, we'll be looking at PowerPoint presentations. PowerPoints are linear presentations, as we talked about in the previous unit, and we'll be looking at, in the first section here, design considerations, then using graphics effectively in PowerPoint, which is a little different than in written form, how to keep and get attention, and then some concluding thoughts. So one of the first things that we need to think about is when to prepare. Prepare early, but not too early. In my first oral presentation ever, in 5th grade, I didn't prepare until the night before. And I was really nervous and did not do well at all. On the other hand, some teams in iGEM prepare far too early for their presentations. And as a result, they spend too much time on their presentation as opposed to actually doing the work. So avoid both of those extremes. Also remember the general principles that we talked about in the previous unit, things about speaking grid, the things that you need to consider about where the presentation is, who's involved, what kind of a talk it is, what the expectations and norms are for that type of talk. The talking grid that we talked about, the doing it in a reasonable order, the general organization, then the content, then key illustrations and developing interest and keeping interest. Also the 6 A's that we looked at: audience, attention, aim, argument, assessment, abilities, things to consider as you develop the early parts of your presentation. In this unit, we're going to be looking specifically at linear presentations, PowerPoint being the key example, and specific things that will help you to prepare a PowerPoint presentation. First thing to consider is screen size. When you know that you're going to do a talk, the first thing you should do is find out how big the screen is going to be. PowerPoint currently defaults to what's called a widescreen image. And that's fine if you have a large conference room or some other room that has a wide screen. This maximizes the area on the laptop, but if you're working in a small classroom, as you may be for like a thesis defense and many other types of presentations, it uses what's called a normal screen. So the widescreen, or the 16 by 9, is wider, but if you present it on one of these normal screens, then you only use about 2/3 of the area, and things appear much smaller. On the other hand, if you try to change it later to that normal or from normal to widescreen, things get messed up. The size of the images, the shapes, sometimes depending on the layout that you're using, all can get messed up. So make sure that you understand that and choose the right screen size before you begin. The next thing is to look at the design of the slides. And the design refers to the background. Now this may differ again depending on your audience. For an academic presentation, normally the information is primary. And so you want to use a fairly simple image that you can get as much information on one slide as you can. And it should be consistent so that it shows that all of this is part of one consistent academic talk. On the other hand, for a sales pitch, you're just trying to get attention. You're trying to keep the audience entertained. And so sales pitches often use multiple different formats, different layouts within a single slideshow, putting the information in different places just to keep the audience attention. Now, iGEM is something of a combination of those two. For the method and results, it's basically an academic presentation. And you should use a fairly simple, consistent background layout. On the other hand, the beginning, where you're talking about your motivation, trying to get interest in the first place, and the end, where you're talking about your collaboration with other teams, your work on education projects, that's more of a sales pitch. And so you can be more flexible in those slides than you will in the academic portion. Okay, also in terms of design, the easiest and simplest way is to use a black on white or black on a fairly light color. That gives you high contrast, makes it most visible. Use a fairly simple design, again, so you maximize the area available for putting other things. And don't use any moving content or GIFs, because as soon as something starts moving, your audience's attention is going to be drawn to that moving object, and they're going to forget whatever you're talking about. Now, one very simple thing that you can do to standardize your slides that a lot of people don't know about is called master slides. Master slides allow you to set the page numbers, the presentation name, the organization, whatever information you want on all your slides, set the font, etc., so that it's all consistent across all of your slides. Now, where do you find this? It differs in Windows versus the Mac format. In Windows, if you look in the View tab, and you'll see something that says Slide Master. That's where, if you open that, you'll find the Slide Master. In Mac, you have to go up to that top bar, and there you'll find that it has the View tab up on that top bar, and when you pull down to the Master, you find the Slide Master. Those get you to the same place. They'll bring up this Slide Master that has a master that controls all of the layouts, and then submasters for each of the individual layouts, the title slide, the title and content, etc. If you change the master layout, it changes all the levels for all of the different submasters. If you change just one of the submasters, which is what it will probably pull up at the beginning, then it will only change that particular submaster. So on this, you can change the font, you can change the size for each individual level of the presentation, each individual level within the slide. And then after you do that, you go back to the normal view, and every level will be changed according to whatever you have set on that master slide. This is a very useful thing that a lot of people don't know about. So try this out. Now, considering the font, make sure that the font is going to be visible to everybody in your audience from the very back of the room, even if their vision isn't that good. And remember that the font and size interact. Here I have an example of 4 different fonts. They're all the same font size, but you can see that the size differs. And so some of them are called serif fonts. The serif is that little curve at the end of a lot of the letters. Those are very good for writing paragraphs. Written text usually uses serif font. On the other hand, for PowerPoints, it's easier to read short things and on a PowerPoint where you're reading at a distance if you use a sans serif font, the ones that have just straight lines, straight curves, without all of those little hooks on the end. And there are others like Comic Sans, which some people really like and some people really hate, that are best reserved for other types of presentations other than academic presentations. Similarly, some use all caps, and those are not good at all for academic presentations. So set those on the master slide, and think about, in particular, the page numbers, the slide numbers. Those, if you change that on the master slide, again, you could put it in a place that's out of the way, not going to interfere with your text. It's large enough that people can read without being overly large, overly dominant. So the final thing I want to think about is text placement. Text placement refers to where you put things on the slide, and this is particularly important when you have a picture or something that you're putting text on top of. Now, you can do things to make it improve. For instance, here's a picture of pineapples, and it has text over it, and it's very hard to see. Just by changing the color to white, you can see that makes it easier to see. But you can also put a background. You can change the color of the background. You can change the transparency of the background. So you can still see the picture through it, but not completely. You can put borders around each of these. You can move it to a different location that's not the key location for what you want to show. All of these will make it better able to see both the text and the picture and see what's important in each. And then the final thing is to think about handouts. The slides are probably in color, but if someone prints handouts from a PDF file or from the slides, those will probably be in black and white. So think about what your slides would look like in black and white. And particularly if you add information to each slide, make sure there's not too much information when it comes to the handouts. Now, the final thing that we want to look at here is not just the placement of things on the slides, but also the placement of people. Let's you address that.
Where do you stand to do your presentation is crucial because you need to be seen clearly. So you need to choose the C position.
What's the C position?
The central position.
Ah.
Yes. So you need to find out where in this room is the best location so that, everybody from each angle can see you clearly.
And they can also see the PowerPoint and you at the same time without having to move too much.
Mm-hmm.
And then also we're dealing with a team rather than an individual. They can't all be in the central position at the same time. So then what?
In team presentation, usually the students tend to be all crowding each other, to be crowded in one corner. And then when it's person A to present, they come out to present it. They say, I am John. I'm going to say such and such. And after they finish, they give to the second person. And she said, I am Mary. I'm going to present such and such. So from one crowded position at a time, moving out, then they don't know where to go after they finish presenting. That's chaos. So we really need to figure out ahead of time, be proactive, where you are going to stand and how are you going to move very smoothly to do it one at a time, but then as a whole. So that's crucial.
And also, as you say, passing the microphones, moving, all of that takes time. So if you can have two microphones so that one person can finish speaking and then while they're moving out of the way, the next person is already beginning, that's certainly advantageous because it saves time, it maintains continuity, it makes the whole process look smoother.
That says we need to rehearse many times ahead of time and to figure out who is going to control the PPT.
Right, because again, sometimes as people go, the next person takes over, they also take control of the PowerPoint. But then that takes time to transfer the PowerPoint remote or control of the computer, however you're controlling it. So if one person can control that in the background, then again, you save time, you make a smoother presentation. But that's something that each group needs to decide.